In Columbus, where fields had remained peaceful for decades, no one expected that the sounds in the night would one day signal the beginning of a silent battle. At first, it was only a few strange noises echoing from the edge of the forest, irregular, unpredictable sounds. No one paid much attention, until the following dawn revealed an entirely different scene. The ground was torn up, crops were trampled, and the entire area looked as if it had been struck by an invisible storm overnight. But that was only the beginning. The appearances that followed were no longer scattered. A herd of wild boars began returning in an almost fixed cycle, emerging from the deep forest with a troubling sense of confidence. Fences were broken, rows of crops were plowed through, and months of hard work were gradually erased in just a few hours of darkness. This was no longer a random incident. It was a coordinated, recurring, and increasingly intensifying pressure. Faced with this situation, the response could not be rushed. The first traps were set along the forest's edge, where the animals frequently appeared. But no placement was random. Footprints imprinted in the damp soil, paths repeated night after night, and patches of disturbed ground, all became data. Gradually, the scope of control expanded. It no longer stopped at the forest edge. Deeper areas were also brought under observation. Transit routes, resting spots, feeding grounds, all were connected into a tightly monitored system. A network began to take shape, quiet yet precise enough to track every movement. Humans were no longer acting individually. Each person was assigned a specific area and task. Once everything was in place, technology began to show its effectiveness. Motion sensor cameras were installed at strategic points. Every time the herd appeared, every movement was recorded. Nothing missed, nothing assumed. The accumulated data gradually formed a clear picture of the herd's behavior. Instead of triggering the traps immediately, bait was kept inside while the entrances remained open. The boars slowly developed a habit of returning, feeding naturally without realizing that the system was gradually closing in around them. This was no longer a single trap, but a calculated process where timing mattered more than speed. Then the moment finally came. When the entire herd had gathered inside, with no individual left outside, the signal was activated. In an instant, the enclosed system operated in perfect synchronization. Exits were blocked almost simultaneously. A heavy, decisive sound echoed. The gates slammed shut, sealing the entire space within. The reaction was immediate. The herd fell into chaos, moving rapidly and searching for an escape in every direction. But no opening remained. Every path led to the same limit, a closed circle that could not be broken. Their intelligence gradually became ineffective as no viable options remained. Within minutes, the intensity of their resistance began to fade. Movements became scattered, directionless. As everything settled, the entire system had fulfilled its task. No more destruction in the night. No more chaotic traces in the morning. Reports from other areas also began to come in. Control points were operating effectively, stopping other herds before they could cause damage. The most destructive individuals were clearly identified and handled under strict control procedures, ensuring swift action while minimizing stress on the surrounding environment. There was no chaos, no extreme reactions, only decisions based on observation and responsibility. The goal was never total elimination, but control to minimize risk. After that night, calm returned, not only to the fields, but also to the mindset of the entire community. There were no more rushed actions, no more ineffective, isolated efforts. Instead, a clear approach emerged. Observe long enough to understand, be patient enough to wait, and act precisely at the right moment. Because in situations like this, the decisive factor lies not in speed, but in the ability to control timing, when everything is truly ready. Not just a few isolated individuals, but an entire herd of wild boars, numbering in the dozens, began flooding into the farmland. It didn't start with noise or obvious warning signs. But with patches of soil being torn up in unusual patterns along the edges of the fields. At first, people thought it was just minor damage. But within days, the entire area looked as if it had been plowed over. The boars moved in groups, following fixed routes with silent yet devastating efficiency. They didn't just feed, they destroyed everything in their path, from irrigation systems to fertile topsoil. When the damage exceeded control, trapping was no longer an option, it became a necessary strategy. Before any trap was set, the most critical phase began: observation. Infrared cameras were placed along trails, capturing every movement during the night. Footprints, tree rubs, and overturned soil were carefully analyzed. Nothing was random. Every behavior followed a consistent pattern. Instead of setting traps immediately, another tactic was deployed: conditioning. Food was spread consistently in the same location over several days, with no signs of danger. The herd began returning at regular times, growing in number each visit. Their caution slowly faded. Once trust was established, they treated the area as a safe feeding ground, and that's when the strategy shifted to the next phase. The first trap appeared almost invisible: a steel enclosure system with an automatic gate, controlled remotely via a smartphone. No noise, no unusual light, everything blended into the environment. When the entire herd moved inside, the command was triggered. The gate dropped instantly, capturing most of the group. But not all. A few sharp individuals stopped just outside the boundary, and those few would change everything that followed. After the first attempt, the herd no longer behaved the same. They became cautious, moving more carefully and avoiding enclosed structures. Standard traps began to fail. This was when the strategy had to evolve, not just placing traps, but designing the space to align with their instincts. An open area was created, with multiple false exits, making the boars believe they could escape at any moment. A large corral trap was built at the forest edge, with 2 drop gates positioned from opposite sides. The interior was wide, removing any sense of confinement. Food was placed at the center, drawing the herd deeper each time. When the moment came, both gates slammed shut simultaneously. No escape remained. Panic erupted instantly, but the reinforced structure absorbed every impact. The remaining individuals didn't disappear, they simply relocated. On a slope near a water source, another trap system was set up, simpler in design, resembling a standard livestock pen. No roof, nothing suspicious. A thick layer of bait was spread across the center, and once again, patience became the key. When the time came, the last group entered without sensing danger. The system closed in, capturing the final individuals. After days of monitoring and adjustment, the most destructive herd was fully controlled. But what mattered more wasn't the number captured. It was how they were guided into the trap. Boar trapping is not just a mechanical process. It is the result of deep behavioral understanding. How they move, how they learn, and how they react to their environment. Every failure becomes a lesson, and every success is built on patience, observation, and adaptation. In this battle, victory doesn't come from force, but from the ability to read what cannot be seen.
Hip, 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 hip. Here comes some more, here comes some more, hip, hip.
Everything didn't begin on a farm, but at the largest freshwater reservoir in Coconino County, a source that sustains tens of thousands of people. Yet with each passing day, that water source is being steadily contaminated. Wild boars surge down like a black flood, tearing apart the shoreline, churning up the muddy bottom, turning the entire reservoir into a polluted swamp. This is no longer an isolated incident, it is a full-scale crisis. And once the situation spiraled out of control, our rapid response team had no choice but to intervene. Emergency access permits were quickly secured from landowners surrounding the reservoir. Immediately after that came 48 hours of continuous surveillance. We tracked deep imprints in the mud, reading every subtle sign. Fresh rub marks on pine trees up to 90 centimeters high were still clearly visible, evidence that the sounder had been active here for multiple consecutive nights. Once their movement routes were mapped, I began the freebaiting phase. Food was spread consistently over several days, with no traps, no interference, only to build habit and trust. And when their caution finally faded, we launched the first strike. A smart corral trap was deployed, fully connected to a smartphone via the cellular network. Around 7 p.m., my phone vibrated. I opened the app. On the screen, an entire group of black wild boars was feeding beneath the bait station. A prompt appeared, "Do you want to close the gate?" I held my breath. My finger tapped yes. Instantly, the gate dropped. The entire sounder was captured in a single moment. At 11:27 p.m., we moved on to the next group. But this time, everything had changed. A few intelligent individuals had stepped back just seconds before the gate dropped. They had learned their first lesson. From that moment on, the group became extremely cautious. They avoided enclosed structures, steering clear of anything that felt unfamiliar. To continue, we had to shift strategy, not just setting traps, but controlling their behavior through space itself. At an open clearing near the forest edge, I constructed a large corral trap using heavy-duty steel panels. The key was in the design. 2 drop gates were positioned from different directions, creating the illusion of multiple escape routes. Wild boars are naturally suspicious, especially of confined spaces. But an open layout with visible exits can trick their survival instincts into believing it's just a safe feeding ground. And just as expected, the sounder gradually lowered its guard, moving deeper into the center of the trap. When the moment came, both steel gates slammed down simultaneously. Every escape route vanished in an instant. Caught off guard, the boars panicked, crashing violently into the mesh walls. After being scattered, the most cunning group moved toward an exposed grassy slope near the reservoir. There, another trap system was set up using reinforced pipe fencing, with no roof. From a distance, it looked no different from a typical livestock pen. A thick layer of corn was spread at the center, and we waited patiently. When the signal came, more than a dozen boars of varying sizes and colors were contained inside. The trigger command was sent remotely. Instantly, the entire structure shook under the force of their impact. After 2 consecutive full captures, the main group responsible for contaminating the water source had been completely removed. A massive circular trap, patented by Jaeger Pro, was deployed as the final stronghold. On the monitoring screen, a large sounder, dark as the night, was cautiously entering the trap zone. One by one, they stepped across the boundary, unaware of what awaited them. And then, the heavy steel gates dropped all at once. Controlling invasive wildlife in the United States is not about brute force, it is a battle of intelligence, powered by modern technology. Every trap, every tap on a smartphone screen is the result of careful behavioral research. Only through precision, patience, and innovation can we truly protect water sources, farmland, and the fragile balance of nature.
What seemed like a quiet morning on the farm suddenly turned into chaos the moment the farmer stepped outside and saw the entire field torn apart. Rows of crops had been ripped from the ground. The soil churned up as if a violent storm had swept through overnight. But there were no signs of weather, only deep, stretched footprints left behind, pointing to one clear conclusion: the wild boars had returned. They weren't moving randomly. They were following familiar paths, repeating the same routes night after night like a pattern already set in motion. At first, the damage was small and scattered. A corner of the field disturbed, a few rows of crops overturned. But it didn't take long for things to escalate. The destruction grew more severe, and the boars began appearing in larger numbers, moving in organized groups, taking turns rooting through the soil in search of food. What worried the farmer wasn't just the scale of the damage, but how quickly they adapted. They learned to recognize danger, avoided simple traps, and even shifted their activity hours to stay out of human sight. One of the oldest methods used to deal with them is the cable snare trap. Steel cables are carefully hidden beneath a thin layer of soil, placed directly along the boar's regular travel routes. When an animal steps into position, the loop tightens almost instantly. No sound, no warning, just a fast and precise mechanism. But setting these traps requires a deep understanding of boar behavior, from how they move to the exact spots where they pause to sniff and assess their surroundings. Even so, snare traps only deal with individual animals. When entire sounders keep returning, farmers are forced to scale up their approach. That's when large net traps come into play, systems designed to capture multiple animals at once. A wide circular net is set up around a baited area, with the net initially lifted off the ground, so the boars can move in and out freely without triggering suspicion. For days, food is placed at the center while the trap remains open. The boars enter, feed, and leave without consequence. Slowly, a sense of safety builds. Then, at the right moment, when the entire group has moved deep inside, the system is triggered. The net drops in seconds, enclosing the entire sounder at once. No escape, no second chance. The response is simply too fast for them to adapt. In areas with especially high populations, metal corral traps offer a more stable solution. Built from heavy steel panels, these enclosures create a controlled space with a one-way gate, allowing boars to enter but not exit. The design takes advantage of their instinct. Once they see food ahead, they move forward without hesitation, step by step, deeper into the trap. These traps are typically placed along the edges where forest meets farmland, natural crossing points the boars use regularly. Bait is positioned deep inside, forcing them to commit fully. Once one enters, others quickly follow, creating a chain reaction. In a single night, an entire group can be contained without triggering panic, preserving the structure of the herd. What sets these methods apart is not just their effectiveness, but their strategy. Instead of direct confrontation, farmers rely on the boar's own habits and instincts to control them. Each trap is more than just a tool. It's the result of careful observation, testing, and constant adjustment based on specific terrain and environmental conditions. This is a quiet form of control, unseen, methodical, and dependent on patience and precision. When traps are placed in the right location at the right time, they don't just reduce damage, they help restore balance between humans and the environment. And the question remains, can people stay one step ahead, or will they always be adapting to the ever-changing behavior of wild boars?
Uzedom Island is not just a peaceful coastal area, but also a place where wild boars operate with remarkable coordination. As African swine fever moves closer, the pressure is no longer about whether they can be hunted, but whether they can be controlled before the damage goes beyond all limits. At first, small traps were deployed in the hope of catching individual animals one by one. But after only one attempt, the herd changed. They no longer moved as before, no longer rushed toward food without thinking, but instead began stopping from a distance, watching for longer, and circling wider before approaching. Some people say that wild animals learn by instinct, but wild boars learn from experience. And every time a trap closed, they did not just lose one member, they also gain a lesson, making the entire herd more cautious and far harder to predict. This is exactly what forced the hunters to completely change their approach. Instead of trying to catch one animal at a time, they began thinking about controlling the entire herd in a single attempt. A large trapping system was built, but it no longer looked like a trap. It resembled an open livestock pen, creating no sense of confinement and showing no obvious signs of danger. Food was placed deep inside, and more importantly, there were no sudden changes for many days in a row. At first, The boars only approached the outer edge. Then a few moved in, and little by little, the entire herd began to see this area as a familiar part of their environment. The decisive moment did not come early. It only came when every animal had stepped inside without keeping any safe distance. At that point, the signal was triggered remotely. 4 steel gates slammed shut at the same time, sealing every escape route in an instant. Panic erupted immediately, but the circular design absorbed the full force of the impacts, leaving no weak point. Most of the herd was contained.
Capture the hogs and worry about them.
However, a few individuals were still standing outside at that very moment, and they became the next challenge. The ones that remained did not disappear. They simply changed the way they existed. They moved more carefully, chose harder to reach positions, and stayed away from any structure that showed signs of enclosure. That made ordinary traps completely useless. Once again, the strategy had to be adjusted. This time, instead of creating a space that looked like a trap, the hunters created an area that was almost impossible to distinguish from the natural environment.
Cool.
No roof, no obvious enclosure, no visible mechanical signs. Food was spread evenly rather than concentrated in one spot. So the boars did not feel lured in, but simply believed they had found a familiar food source. Patience became the deciding factor. For many days, no action was taken. The distance between humans and the herd was gradually erased. Their caution faded little by little. And then, when the time came, the entire remaining group moved into that area without recognizing any danger at all. This time, the system was activated with precision. There were no mistakes, no animals left standing outside. The entire herd responsible for the greatest damage was finally brought under full control. The final result did not lie in the number, but in the process. These traps did not work because of mechanical force, but because of the way they blended into the environment so completely that they went unnoticed. There was no pressure, no sudden disruption, only a sequence of small changes, repeated long enough for the herd to adjust its own behavior. Instead of being driven into the trap, they walked into it in the very way they believed was safe. And that belief was exactly what was being exploited.
Escaped. But
What made this confrontation so difficult was not the strength of the herd, but its ability to adapt over time. Every encounter became another chance for them to refine the way they survived. Moving later, circling wider, checking more carefully. That forced humans to change as well, not by moving faster, but by becoming more precise. Because in an environment where every sign can be noticed, Just one small detail out of place is enough to make the entire system fail before it even has a chance to work.
Across the vast fields stretching through central Florida, where the damp ground is frequently torn up as if shaken by a silent underground force, wild boars are no longer just occasional nighttime visitors. They appear in dense numbers, moving in organized groups, leaving behind trails of destruction that cut across the land like invisible scars. At first, the damage is minor and scattered, but within just a few days, entire areas can be completely transformed. The real concern is not the strength of individual animals, but how the entire sounder operates as a system, repeating patterns, precise movements, and becoming increasingly unpredictable over time. In the early stages, single traps were deployed in hopes of quickly controlling the situation. The objective was simple: remove individuals to reduce pressure. But the outcome proved entirely different. After each capture, the remaining boars did not return as expected. Instead, they became more cautious, moved more slowly, and began carefully observing their surroundings before approaching. Small traps, rather than solving the problem, unintentionally forced the entire group to adapt and sharpen its survival instincts. Recognizing the limitations of this approach, a new strategy began to take shape, one that no longer focused on individuals, but on the entire structure of the group. Large-scale trapping systems were designed as open spaces, with steel posts forming wide circular enclosures that did not immediately feel closed. There were no sudden movements, no immediate triggering mechanisms. Everything was arranged to blend naturally into the environment, as if it had always been part of the landscape. The most critical phase was not when the trap was activated, but the period before it. Food was placed outside the area, then gradually moved deeper inside over several days. No intervention took place during this time. The boars began to approach, initially cautious, but gradually becoming familiar. They entered and exited multiple times, observed, retreated, and returned again. Over time, the line between safety and risk slowly faded. Once familiarity reached its peak, the entire group began entering the trap area as part of a normal routine. This was when the human element returned, but not through rushed action. The operator monitored everything through cameras, waiting for a single decisive moment. When every individual was inside the controlled space. No one left outside. No hesitation. Only then was the decision made. The triggering mechanism was executed remotely, fast and precise. A large gate dropped into place, sealing the entire enclosure without leaving any gap for escape. Everything happened in an instant, but behind it were days, even weeks, of preparation. Trigger too early, and part of the group escapes and learns. Trigger too late, and the opportunity disappears. This is not a race of speed, but a test of behavioral understanding. The entire process requires near absolute patience. No human traces, no direct pressure. The environment remains untouched, as if no interference ever occurred. It is this silence that allows the boars to return to their normal patterns. Except this time, everything unfolds within a structure that has already been calculated in advance. When the right moment arrives, a single action is enough to conclude the entire sequence of preparation. The final result is not just about the number of boars captured, but the complete disruption of the group's movement system. Once the structure is removed, the familiar pathways disappear with it. Pressure on farmland is significantly reduced, not because individuals are removed, but because the collective behavior itself has been broken. This shows that the true effectiveness of trapping lies not in the physical mechanism, but in its ability to control behavior on a larger scale.
What would you do if, overnight, all the hard work of an entire season was wiped out? For many farmers in the United States, this is not a distant scenario. As night falls, fields that seem peaceful by day become targets for silent moving groups of wild boars. Their appearances are not random. They return again and again, following familiar paths as if they have memorized the entire area. Unlike animals that simply forage and leave, wild boars leave behind far more severe traces. They tear up the ground at an astonishing speed, overturning the topsoil within minutes. Plant roots are exposed, soil structure is disrupted, and irrigation systems, the lifeline of the entire field, can suffer serious damage. The destruction is not just about what they eat, but how they interact with the environment. Estimates suggest that wild boars cause between $2 to $2.5 billion in agricultural damage each year in the United States. Yet that figure does not fully capture the real impact. Many crop failures begin with small disturbances, when disrupted soil interferes with plant growth. If not controlled in time, these minor damages quickly escalate into a chain of irreversible losses. A single group of wild boars, as few as 10 to 20 individuals, can destroy more than a hectare of land in just one night. What makes this even more critical is that it often happens right at harvest time, when crops reach their highest economic value. At that point, this is no longer just a natural occurrence. It becomes a direct threat to livelihoods, forcing farmers to take action. In response, one question continues to arise. Is there a way to control wild boars while ensuring safety, humaneness, and ecological balance? The answer is gradually emerging through the development of modern trapping systems. Unlike outdated perceptions, today's traps are no longer confrontational. They are designed to guide behavior, minimize direct contact, and manage intrusion in a controlled and strategic way. These systems operate based on a deep understanding of wild boar behavior. Instead of force, they rely on the animal's natural tendencies, moving in groups and returning to familiar locations. Bait is placed strategically, guiding the herd into controlled areas without causing panic. When the right moment comes, the system is activated with precision, ensuring effectiveness while minimizing stress on the animals. The effectiveness of this approach lies not only in reducing damage, but also in changing how farmers deal with the problem. They no longer have to stay awake all night guarding their fields. Instead, they monitor through cameras, analyze data, and adjust strategies proactively. Every decision is based on observation, rather than rushed reactions to unexpected situations. Gradually, the fields begin to stabilize again. Signs of disturbance become less frequent, and the familiar movement paths of wild boars are disrupted. More importantly, farmers regain a sense of control, not through confrontation, but through understanding and careful preparation. It is a quiet shift, but one that brings long-term results. In many places, wild boars are not seen as enemies. They remain a part of the natural ecosystem. But when the boundary between nature and human activity becomes blurred, and when damage begins to directly affect lives, finding a balanced solution becomes more essential than ever. In this context, traps are not tools of destruction, but intermediaries, reducing conflict and protecting what matters most. Sometimes the effectiveness of this solution is reflected in the simplest ways. A farmer might say that since the system was implemented, the boars no longer return. Sleep becomes uninterrupted again, and the fields, holding a year's worth of labor, are no longer threatened by nighttime invasions. Ultimately, controlling wild boars is not an extreme measure, but a necessary step in the modern context. When used correctly, trapping systems are not meant to eliminate nature, but to maintain balance between humans and the environment. And sometimes a single well-timed decision, carefully considered, quiet, and non-confrontational, is enough to save an entire harvest.
For decades now, farmers and ranchers have struggled to control the rising population of destructive and dangerous feral hogs.
Brazil is facing one of the most alarming biological invasions ever recorded. A unique hybrid type of pig, covered in a natural armor, made of scar tissue and hardened fat up to 5 centimeters thick, is rendering most traditional control methods ineffective. They can breach electric fences, evade traps, and reproduce at an astonishing rate, up to 20 piglets per litter. Their presence not only disrupts forest ecosystems, but also poses a serious risk of spreading disease, directly impacting the global food supply chain. The origins of this situation date back to the early 20th century, when European wild boars were introduced to South America for hunting purposes. Already known for their resilience, they gradually adapted to the new environment. When hunting farms were no longer maintained, these animals escaped into the wild and began expanding their range. The turning point came when they crossbred with domestic pigs, animals known for their high reproductive capacity. This combination didn't weaken them. Instead, it created a hybrid with both wild strength and rapid growth. The result is the Java porco, a population that can reach up to 300 kilograms per individual, with exceptional physical power and adaptability. One of their most notable features is the dense subdermal structure composed of scar tissue, hardened fat, and tightly connected muscle layers, functioning as a natural shield that significantly reduces the impact of conventional control measures. In addition, their tusks are constantly sharpened through natural friction, becoming highly effective defensive tools. Beyond their physical advantages, they exhibit strong adaptability, living in organized groups led by experienced females who can memorize vast territories and adjust behavior when facing threats. As a result, their impact goes far beyond foraging, extending into environmental damage, as their rooting behavior alters soil structure, disrupts ecosystems, affects water sources, and increases the risk of transmitting diseases to livestock and humans if not properly controlled. In this context, large-scale control methods have been implemented with a completely different approach. Instead of causing disruption, trap systems are designed to blend into the natural environment. Steel posts are arranged in a wide circular formation, not fully enclosed from the start. There is no sudden drop mechanism or anything that might trigger panic. Every detail is designed to create a sense of familiarity and safety. Food is initially placed outside the area, then gradually moved deeper inside over time. This process continues without direct human intervention, allowing the herd to develop a natural habit of entering the space. Once familiarity reaches a stable level, the entire group begins to move into the trap area as part of their normal behavior. At this stage, human involvement truly begins, through remote monitoring systems using cameras. Operators patiently wait for a single moment, when every individual is fully inside the controlled area. No animals left outside. No unexpected variables. Only when this condition is met is the decision made. The activation mechanism is quick and precise. The gate closes in an instant, forming a fully enclosed space with no gaps. However, behind that moment lies a preparation process that can take days, even weeks. If triggered too early, part of the herd will escape and change their behavior. If too late, the opportunity may be lost. This is not a race against time, but a coordination of observation, analysis, and perfect timing. The entire process demands patience and minimizes human presence to the greatest extent possible. There are no sudden interventions, and the environment is kept unchanged to maintain a natural feel. It is this stillness that allows the herd to continue its routine, while in reality, every movement is carefully calculated. When the moment comes, a single precise action is enough to complete the entire operation.
Load up. Load up. Load up.
For many years of participating in wild boar control operations, seasoned individuals have consistently emphasized a core principle. When wild boars begin appearing on public roads, the issue has already extended beyond the scope of a single farm. A fully grown individual can weigh hundreds of kilograms. If it suddenly charges onto the road in the dark, it is fully capable of causing serious collisions. In states such as Texas or Florida, such situations occur frequently, and the consequences often unfold faster than humans can respond. Early in the morning, groups of farmers, together with control teams, were already in place. A large map was spread out, and high-risk areas were quickly identified. Sections of land that had been uprooted, areas where livestock frequently appeared, as well as crossing points where herds typically moved across roads were all carefully marked. This was not a spontaneous reaction, but a plan built on real-world observation and data accumulated over time. At the central location, a large-scale corral trap system was constructed. This was the key element of the entire strategy, to contain the entire herd in a single operation. The setup process was deliberate and calculated. Bait was arranged in layers, guiding from the outside inward, forming a natural path that led the herd deeper into the trap zone. The objective was not to attract them immediately, but to create a sense of familiarity. During the first nights, cameras only captured them standing outside, probing and observing. By the second night, a few smaller individuals began to step inside. Then, over successive nights, their alertness gradually faded, and the entire herd moved deeper toward the center. Persistence began to yield results. Once the herd had developed a habit of approaching the trap area, the moment for action was determined. The gate was triggered and shut in an instant. Inside, chaos erupted immediately. The herd compressed together, circling and constantly shifting direction within the confined space. Heavy impacts against the steel frame produced deep, muffled sounds, not overly piercing, but heavy enough to create a palpable sense of tension for anyone standing nearby. Even so, experienced individuals were not drawn into that chaos. They did not focus on the movement of the herd, but instead observed the structure of the trap itself, every joint, every load-bearing bar, every point that might be subjected to intense pressure. because this was the most critical phase. A single minor flaw in design or installation could cause the entire plan to collapse within seconds. Inside the trap, the herd continued to move relentlessly, searching for any possible escape. Yet the structure of the trap remained intact. No weak points were broken, no gaps emerged. All pressure was contained within controlled limits. And that was the defining factor, not strength, but the ability to control the situation. In surrounding areas, secondary traps also began to take effect. Individuals that broke away or deviated from the group were intercepted. The entire team held their positions, performing exactly the roles assigned in advance. There were no sudden changes, no actions outside the plan. Everything operated like a carefully calculated system. After just 1 week, the effectiveness became clearly visible. No new tracks appeared near residential areas. No more herds crossed the roads at night. Cameras recorded a distinct change. The area grew quieter, and daily life gradually returned to normal. Roads that once posed hidden dangers had now become safer, at least for the time being. A well-conceived plan, executed with patience and precision, will always deliver more sustainable results than any rushed reaction. This is not merely a story about wildlife control, but about how humans re-establish boundaries between residential areas and nature, between stability and chaos. And from such operations, a principle gradually becomes clear. When the movement of these animals can be controlled, everything around them can be protected.